We're able to live because of the hard work of our farmers. I insist to my soon-to-be father-in-law, but my words fall on deaf ears. He mocks farming as a job that's not profitable. He even laughs, challenging me to show him the life of a farmer. Fine, let him see my family farm. He'll regret his words soon enough. My name is Henry. I used to work in sales, but when my dad's health deteriorated, I took over the family farm. I'm the second son, but my elder brother moved overseas for work. That left me as the only one to continue the family business. I have a sweet and strong-willed fiancé. I fell head over heels for Ellie the moment I saw her working at our regular cafe, and that's how our relationship started. 2 years into dating, she accepted my marriage proposal. So here I am, about to meet Ellie's parents. Gosh, I'm nervous, I mutter, looking up at the luxurious high-rise where Ellie's parents live. Don't worry, Henry. I've already talked to my mom about you. But my dad, well, that's another story. I've heard her father is a stern man who owns a few restaurants. As nervous as I was, I go in and greet them. To my relief, both warmly welcome me. Sorry that we haven't been able to sync our schedules because of my busy work, the father-in-law began, and started elaborating on how well his company was doing. Henry, I hear you're the top performer in sales. You must be making good money, right? Do you have plans on where you want to live in the future? How about moving into this high-rise condo? All I could do was force a smile at the rapid-fire questions. You're being rude to Henry, said the mother-in-law as she served the tea. Thank you. This tea is quite good. The delicious flavor helped ease my tension. Oh, I'm glad you like it. My brother grows the tea leaves. Our family home has a tea plantation, and they always send us the fresh tea. The conversation took a lively turn as my mother-in-law and I chatted about the tea. My father-in-law then huffed and said, "A tea plantation, how antiquated. Few households drink tea these days. I wonder when your family home will go out of business." His disparaging remark about her family home left my mother-in-law looking downcast. I had heard somewhere that tea plantations aren't as profitable as they used to be. It's labor-intensive work that requires skill and, above all, manpower. Still, seeing my mother-in-law so disheartened, I couldn't keep my mouth shut. We owe our livelihood to the farmers who work hard to produce our food. We're able to live thanks to the people who grow crops. The same is true for tea. I'm sure many people find comfort in the delicious taste of this tea. At my words, my father-in-law scowled. I seemed to have put him in a bad mood. The timing couldn't have been worse, but I took a deep breath and blurted out, "I've decided to quit my job and take over the family farm. I've decided to protect the land that's been passed down through the generations. Ellie has accepted this, so please, support us in the future." The moment I announced that I had taken over the farm, my father-in-law's face turned red with anger. "A farmer? I agreed to meet you because you were the top-performing sales guy. Ellie, did you lie to me?" My father-in-law, his face filled with anger, turned to Ellie. "I've tried to talk to you about this many times, but you were too busy. Besides, Mom supports our decision," Ellie said, sighing. She must have known it would come to this. Upon hearing that I had switched from my job to farming, my father-in-law's attitude changed dramatically. It was a parade of prejudice against farmers. How dare a poor person living in an old house talk about getting married? It's embarrassing to tell people that my daughter's husband is a farmer and so on. When asked what I was growing, I answered mainly cherry tomatoes, and he exclaimed, "Cherry tomatoes? They don't seem to make much money and there's no future in them." "Of course we're growing more than just tomatoes," I tried to explain, but my father-in-law cut me off and started laughing. Growing a variety of vegetables is proof that you're not making a profit." He dismissed whatever I said. My father-in-law started a restaurant business at a young age and was successful, so he's particular about profits. Although I've just taken over the farm, I've certainly been considering profits. But as I tried to discuss this, my father-in-law shook his head dismissively. He didn't expect much from me. "I'd like to see what life as a farmer is like. Is your house a shack? Are your parents wearing overalls and straw hats while working? Maybe I should meet them next time." I was getting angry at him making fun of my house and parents, but the one who protested angrily was Ellie. "I can't believe you're making fun of farmers. I'm ashamed to be your daughter." At Ellie's words, my father-in-law was enraged and slapped her on the cheek. My mother-in-law was angry that he had raised his hand against her daughter. Ellie, with tears from the pain, turned the situation into complete chaos. "You're living in this high-rise condo thanks to me. Be grateful. I don't care who a daughter like you marries." I took Ellie, who was sobbing, and left my in-laws' house. I couldn't forgive my father-in-law for making fun of farming and for hitting Ellie. "Hello, it's Henry. I'll be bringing my fiancée and her parents next time." I called my father and reported every word of my father-in-law's remarks. "He runs restaurants, doesn't he? What's the name of it?" he asked, so I told him my father-in-law's name and the name of the restaurants he runs. "I have an idea, so wait for me." I asked what he meant by an idea, but he said he was still uncertain and hung up the phone. After a while, my father called back. After hearing from my father, I immediately went to meet some people. Later, Ellie and I went to greet my mother-in-law again. She apologized for my father-in-law's arrogant attitude. He had apparently become arrogant since his restaurant business took off. He moved into a high-rise condo to show off to people around him and began to look down on those who earned less than him. It was a daily occurrence for him to ridicule her family's tea farm. His affairs with women were not hidden, and he did as he pleased, according to my mother-in-law. She said she endured it all for her daughter. "I don't want to cause trouble for Ellie and Henry by getting a divorce." My mother-in-law is a kind person who thinks of Ellie and me. "Don't worry about us. Please think of your own happiness." When I said that, she thanked me and smiled. "I want to help my brother who inherited our family's tea farm. I don't want to see the farm that has been handed down for generations go out of business." He reminded me of the importance of tea farm, Henry. So I'm going to divorce him and go back to my parents' home. It seemed that my mother-in-law's resolution is already made. The day came when I took my in-laws to my parents' home. After getting off the airplane, we drove for another hour. There were vast fields and farms around us. I can't believe there are houses where people live in such a rural area. My father-in-law spat out in the car. Ellie and my mother-in-law obviously looked uncomfortable, but patient, probably because he could say he wanted to go home if a quarrel started here. "I'm looking forward to see the life of a farmer. Is the toilet outside or something?" My father-in-law ridiculed my home, laughing uproariously. "You'll see when we get there." After driving a while, we saw a large gate and high walls. "I'm back. I brought everyone with me." When I spoke to the intercom, the gate opened automatically. "What a grand gate! Oh, and the garden is so beautiful!" Ellie followed me, cheerfully praising the scenery. We leave the garden to a gardener, but it's an English garden, so it's called. Because of my parents who love Europe, there were many of my mother's favorite roses planted. My mother-in-law entered the garden and happily sniffed the scent of the roses. My father-in-law grumbled that it was a bad taste garden. "Please, this way." There's a large building beyond the large garden. That is my family home. The brick-built house has 12 rooms and living, dining, kitchen. It's quite spacious. In front of the entrance, there are 2 luxury cars and 3 off-road motorcycles parked. All the land around our house is our own farmland. My in-laws and Ellie were all agape. My parents greeted us at the entrance. Looking at my father-in-law, they showed a smile. Of course, they are not wearing overalls. When I entered the living room, there were relatives and some people gathered. Not only my parents, but everyone was dressed in suits. My father-in-law, insisting that formal attire is unnecessary when meeting farmers, had come in his usual attire of a t-shirt and jeans. Because my mother-in-law, Ellie, and I were dressed relatively formally, he stood out significantly. Hello. Perhaps feeling out of place? My father-in-law said in a small voice, looking down in embarrassment. My father introduced them to the relatives. This is Ellie, Henry's fiancée, and these are Ellie's parents. It seems like Ellie's father has quite a prejudice against farmers. Were you surprised to see that our home was not a shabby hut? The gaze the relatives cast upon my father-in-law was cold. It seemed that my father-in-law had told everyone the story I had told him. No, I mean, that's not... As my father-in-law stammered. Several men stepped forward. Why are you guys here? My father-in-law looked surprised with widened eyes. We are disappointed in you, one of the men said, looking at my father-in-law. These men were organic farmers who were actually supplying vegetables to the restaurants my father-in-law runs. Hearing the name of the store, my father made connections and contacted these farmers. My father, who has been a farmer for many years, has many acquaintances. I had directly met them and conveyed my father-in-law's remarks. Apparently, my father-in-law had always been arrogant, and there were many complaints. Those who were outraged that he looked down on farmers so much had come today to directly voice their complaints. We would like to terminate our business relationship at the end of the next contract. Everyone nodded when one of the farmers said this. Wait a minute. Our specialty is organic vegetables. My father-in-law runs several Italian restaurants featuring vegetables popular among the women. Despite this, I thought it was unbelievable to make fun of the farmers who produce the vegetables. I guess for him, anything is fine as long as it makes a profit. He had set his sights on organic vegetables because he thought dumb women should bite if he touted them as healthy food. While my father-in-law was flustered at being told they wanted to stop trading, he is a businessman. He seemed to think that the farmers would also be in trouble if the contract ends. Are you sure about this? You're gonna lose your income, you know. Perhaps he regained his composure and began to threaten, acting high and mighty. Don't worry about that, I interjected, anticipating that my father-in-law would say something like this. The farmers had said they wanted to quit dealing with my father-in-law's company, but they would be in trouble if their source of income decreased. Through my sales job, I had made connections with so many people in various industries. Among them were many restaurant owners and food manufacturers. Even if they extended the deal with my father-in-law, I had introduced them to the next place they could do business, so they wouldn't be in trouble. When I told this fact, my father-in-law visibly started trembling. What am I supposed to do if I can't get vegetables? To my father-in-law, who held his head in his hands, my father said this. Why not ask Henry? We also grow organic vegetables. Despite the ridicule from my father-in-law, we had started focusing on organic farming in our fields, including cherry tomatoes. As a result of repeated improvement in the variety, we were able to harvest quite sweet vegetables. We even had several invitations from companies wanting to contract with us. My father-in-law quickly turned to me, but I just smiled and said, of course, we refuse to do business. He slumped his shoulders and fell silent. Next to the quiet father-in-law, my mother-in-law and our parents were having a lively conversation.
"When I bring the fresh tea from my hometown next time,"
my mother-in-law declared as my parents were thrilled. In the car on the way back, my father-in-law exploded in anger. "How dare you cancel the deal? Do you want my business to go bankrupt?" He was shouting from the back seat. Frankly, I couldn't care less about what happens to his restaurants. "And you, as my wife, not even defending me. This is why I hate country women." Perhaps because I was completely ignoring him, his anger turned towards my mother-in-law.
"Sure, you prefer city women, right? Your current favorite is Mary, isn't it?"
When my mother-in-law calmly started talking, the car fell silent.
"Henry paid to hire a detective. You didn't hide it at all, so the evidence was easy to obtain. Please take care of the divorce documents and the alimony payments."
My father-in-law turned pale at her words. "Divorce? What are you saying? How do you plan to survive without my earnings?" She told him she planned to work on the tea farm her brother inherited after the divorce. Then my father-in-law smirked and said, "Isn't that tea farm on the verge of bankruptcy? Fine, I'll divorce you. It's better to live with a young woman than an aging wife." Then, no one spoke a word, and a heavy silence filled the car. When we arrived at the airport, not wanting to be together any longer, my father-in-law headed towards the gate alone. Ellie, looking at her father's back, muttered sadly, "To think such a man as my father." "I think your father will definitely regret his choice," I said, pulling Ellie's shoulder towards me. A few days later, my in-laws' divorce was finalized. Due to the evidence of his affair, he was fully liable. He seemed to have nearly forced my mother-in-law, saying, "I'll give you money, just leave." Ellie and I were angry when we heard the story, but my mother-in-law was laughing, saying it was okay since she got a lot of money. $50,000 in alimony from my father-in-law, and $15,000 in alimony from his mistress. She plans to use this money to revive the tea farm. While my father-in-law was enjoying himself at his high-rise condo with his mistress, her husband barged in, turning the place into a battlefield. Yes, my father-in-law's mistress was a married woman. We had known that when we had the detective investigate, so we thought it wouldn't end well. My father-in-law, who was also being sued for alimony by his mistress's husband, must have learned his lesson about women. Even after that, it seems like he's still living alone in his high-rise condo. His bad reputation spread among the farmers, and the number of farms willing to do business with him drastically decreased. That led him to close his branches, which were centered around organic vegetables. Perhaps feeling lonely, I heard that letters from my father-in-law occasionally arrive at my mother-in-law's parents' house. The content is pathetic, asking her to come back because he's lonely. At first, my mother-in-law was reading the letters, but now she says she just throws them away without opening them. Once he called, she cut him off, saying,
"If you're lonely, why don't you move out of the high rise?"
We laughed when we heard that from her. We don't know whether he couldn't stand living alone in a large room or whether his business went under and he couldn't afford to live in the high rise anymore. But we heard that he moved to a small apartment. I've been extremely busy since I took over the farm, but having Ellie with me is a big support. She probably never thought she'd become a farmer's wife when we were dating. Yet, she came with me without a word of complaint, so I have nothing but gratitude for her. "I think I like farming. It must be my mom's blood." Ellie, laughing, is adorable. A year later, we had our wedding. It was a grand ceremony, but my father-in-law was not there. He must be sad that he couldn't attend his only daughter's wedding. From my mother-in-law, we received freshly packed new tea, saying she wanted us to serve it to the guests. Thanks to my mother-in-law's help, the tea farm, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, seemed likely to turn a significant profit. Their tea is still fragrant and delicious as always.
The incessant knocking hammered through the walls of my quiet suburban home, shattering the peaceful Saturday morning. My heart skipped a beat as I peered through the peephole, unprepared for the sight that greeted me. My brother-in-law, Griffin, standing on my doorstep with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Avery, open up," he demanded, his voice laced with impatience. Reluctantly, I unlatched the door, and there he stood, reeking of cheap cologne and overconfidence. "Griffin, what are you doing here?" "Can't a guy drop by to see his favorite sister-in-law?" He brushed past me, inviting himself into my living room without hesitation. "Nice place you've got here, Avery. Cozy." I bristled at his condescending tone, remembering Ethan's warnings about his brother's manipulative nature. "Cut to the chase, Griffin. What do you want?" He plopped down on the sofa, making himself at home. "Straight to business, eh? I like that." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I want what's rightfully mine, my share of Ethan's estate." My breath caught in my throat as the implication of his words sank in. "What are you talking about? Ethan left everything to me." Griffin scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Come on, Avery. You didn't really think my brother would cut me out entirely, did you? He owed me, and I intend to collect." Anger flared within me as I realized the depths of his greed. Ethan made his wishes clear. "I won't let you tarnish his legacy with your selfish demands." Griffin rose to his feet, towering over me. "You'll regret this, Avery," he snarled, his charming facade crumbling. "I'll get what's mine, one way or another." With that ominous threat hanging in the air, he stormed out, leaving me shaken to my core. As the door slammed shut behind him, I sank into the armchair, my mind racing. Ethan had warned me about Griffin's insatiable greed, but I never imagined he would stoop so low. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized this was only the beginning of what promised to be a tumultuous battle. In the days following Griffin's unannounced visit, a sense of unease settled over me like a thick fog. His ominous threat echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan had always been tight-lipped about his personal affairs, but now I found myself sifting through his meticulously organized files, desperate to uncover any clues that could shed light on Griffin's sudden interest in his estate. It was then that I stumbled upon a locked safe, tucked away in the back of Ethan's closet. My hands trembled as I punched in the combination he had once revealed to me, and the heavy door swung open, revealing a trove of documents and financial records. My heart raced as I pored over the papers, piecing together the puzzle of Ethan's hidden investments and substantial fortune. It all made sense now. Griffin had caught wind of this secret, and his greed had been ignited. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know what you're hiding, Avery. Give me what I want, or there will be consequences." I felt the blood drain from my face as the gravity of the situation hit me. Griffin was watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The following weeks were a whirlwind of harassment and veiled threats. Ominous letters arrived at my doorstep, filled with cryptic warnings and demands for Ethan's assets. Even in public, I couldn't escape Griffin's menacing presence, catching glimpses of him lurking in the shadows, his eyes burning with malice. It was during one of these encounters at the local grocery store that I knew I couldn't face this battle alone. As Griffin approached me, his slimy grin sending shivers down my spine, I caught sight of Jonah, my longtime friend and attorney, across the aisle. Without hesitation, I called out to him, and Jonah's eyes widened in recognition. He hurried over, his presence momentarily causing Griffin to falter. "Is everything all right, Avery?" Jonah asked, his gaze shifting between me and the unwelcome visitor. "Not really," I replied, mustering all my courage. "Griffin here seems to think he has a claim on Ethan's estate." Griffin's face contorted with rage, but before he could lash out, Jonah stepped in, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "I think it's best you leave, Griffin," Jonah stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. With a contemptuous glare, Griffin stalked away, but not before muttering a chilling promise under his breath. "This isn't over, Avery, not by a long shot." As he disappeared from sight, I turned to Jonah, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to stop him, Jonah, before it's too late." In the aftermath of the confrontation with Griffin at the grocery store, Jonah wasted no time in springing into action. We retreated to his office, the weight of the situation bearing down on us like a heavy cloak. "We need to gather evidence, Avery," Jonah said, his brow furrowed with determination. "Griffin won't back down easily, but we can stop him if we play our cards right." I nodded, my hands trembling as I recounted the torrent of threats and harassment I'd endured. Jonah listened intently, taking meticulous notes and occasionally glancing up at me with a reassuring nod. "First things first, we need to secure your assets," he stated, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'll start the process of transferring everything into a trust, making it harder for Griffin to lay claim to Ethan's fortune." A wave of relief washed over me. Knowing that Jonah was on my side, he had been a trusted friend and advisor to Ethan and me for years, and his unwavering support gave me the strength I needed to face the battle ahead. Over the next few weeks, we delved deep into Griffin's past, uncovering a trail of deceit and shady business ventures. It became increasingly clear that his interest in Ethan's estate was fueled by more than just greed. It was a desperate attempt to salvage his own crumbling financial empire. "Look at this," Jonah said one day, sliding a thick file across his desk. "Griffin has been involved in numerous fraudulent investment schemes, preying on unsuspecting individuals and making off with their life savings." My stomach churned as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing a new layer of Griffin's depravity. "How could he do this to innocent people?" I asked, my voice laced with disgust. Jonah shook his head grimly. "Greed can drive even the most charming individuals to commit despicable acts." As the evidence mounted, a plan began to take shape. We would lure Griffin into a trap, using his own greed against him. Jonah arranged a meeting with a group of potential investors, who were actually trusted associates of his. The stage was set, and all we needed was for Griffin to take the bait. Sure enough, the prospect of securing a substantial sum of money proved too tempting for Griffin to resist. He agreed to the meeting, unaware of the snare we had carefully laid. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Avery?" Jonah asked, his eyes filled with concern. "Once we set this plan in motion, there's no turning back." I steeled my resolve, anger burning deep within me at the thought of Griffin's callous actions. "I'm ready, Jonah. It's time to put an end to this once and for all." With a firm nod, Jonah squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "Then let's do it. Let's bring Griffin down and secure Ethan's legacy." In the weeks leading up to the fateful meeting, Griffin's desperation grew palpable. His attempts to intimidate me intensified, with a barrage of threatening messages and ominous encounters that left me constantly on edge. "You think you can outsmart me, Avery?" he sneered during one such confrontation outside the local grocery store. "I'll make you pay for this, mark my words." His eyes burned with a simmering fury, and for a fleeting moment, I questioned whether I had the fortitude to face him head-on. But then I remembered Ethan's unwavering spirit, and the countless nights he spent poring over documents, building a legacy worth protecting. As the days ticked by, Griffin's tactics grew more insidious. He launched a smear campaign against me, spreading vicious rumors and lies throughout our once close-knit community. Whispers followed me wherever I went, and I found myself increasingly isolated, my once friendly neighbors now regarding me with suspicion and disdain. "Don't let him get to you, Avery," Jonah urged during one of our strategy sessions. "He's desperate, grasping at straws to break your resolve." I nodded, my jaw clenched with determination. "I won't give him the satisfaction, Jonah. Ethan wouldn't have backed down, and neither will I." Despite the mounting pressure, we remained steadfast in our plan, meticulously preparing for the fateful meeting that would either be our triumph or our undoing. Finally, the day arrived, and I found myself seated in Jonah's office, surrounded by his trusted associates posing as potential investors. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we awaited Griffin's arrival. When he finally swept through the door, his arrogance was palpable. He greeted the assembled group with a practiced charm, oblivious to the trap we had carefully laid. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, flashing that sickening grin. "I appreciate you taking the time to hear me out today. I have an opportunity that will change all of our lives forever." I fought the urge to roll my eyes as he launched into his well-rehearsed pitch, touting the merits of a once-in-a-lifetime investment that was sure to yield astronomical returns. As he spoke, I caught Jonah's eye, and he gave me a subtle nod. It was time to spring the trap. "That all sounds well and good, Mr. Collins," one of Jonah's associates chimed in, "but we'll need to see some documentation before we can proceed." Griffin's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Of course, I have everything right here. He reached into his briefcase and produced a stack of papers, but as he began to hand them out, Jonah cleared his throat. If you don't mind, Griffin, I'd like to take a look at those documents first. The tension in the room was palpable as Jonah scrutinized the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his expression grave. These documents are forgeries, Griffin, poorly executed ones at that. In that moment, the facade crumbled and Griffin's true nature was laid bare for all to see. The storm had finally broken, and there would be no turning back. The seconds ticked by in deafening silence as the weight of Jonah's words hung heavy in the air. Griffin's face contorted into a mask of rage, his carefully cultivated charm crumbling like a house of cards. You think you're so smart, don't you, Avery? He spat, his eyes boring into me with a venomous glare. You and your little lawyer friend have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into. I refused to cower, meeting his gaze with steely resolve. It's over, Griffin. Your lies and deceit have been exposed. He let out a bitter laugh, the sound grating on my nerves. You really believe you've won? This is just the beginning. Before anyone could react, Griffin lunged forward, swiping the stack of forged documents from Jonah's hands. In a blur of motion, he tore them to shreds, the remnants fluttering to the floor like confetti. You want proof? He snarled. I'll give you proof. With trembling hands, he reached into his briefcase once more, producing a fresh set of documents. My heart sank as I recognized the familiar letterhead. It was from Ethan's investment firm. These are the real deal, Avery, Griffin sneered, waving the papers in front of my face. Proof of my rightful claim to Ethan's fortune. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Could it be possible that Ethan had left a portion of his estate to Griffin after all? Jonah, ever the voice of reason, stepped in. Let me see those, Griffin. For a tense moment, I thought Griffin might refuse, but then he relented, thrusting the documents into Jonah's outstretched hand. As Jonah pored over the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. I held my breath, waiting for the verdict that would either shatter my world or solidify my victory. Finally, Jonah looked up, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. These documents are forgeries as well, Griffin, and sloppy ones at that. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived as Griffin erupted in a fury. You're lying, he roared, his face contorted with rage. Those documents are legitimate, and you know it. Jonah remained calm, unfazed by Griffin's outburst. I'm afraid not, Griffin. The signatures are poorly forged, and the dates don't align with Ethan's financial records. It's a pathetic attempt at deception, and it's over. Griffin's shoulders slumped, the fight seemingly draining out of him. He sank back into his chair, if defeated, his grand scheme laid bare for all to witness. As the gravity of the situation settled in, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the broken man before me. Once so charming and self-assured, he had been reduced to a desperate, grasping shell of his former self, undone by his own insatiable greed. But any sympathy I harbored was quickly overshadowed by a sense of righteous triumph. Ethan's legacy had been protected, and justice had prevailed. As the others in the room began to disperse, Jonah placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It's over, Avery. You've won. I nodded, letting out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, Jonah, for everything. He offered me a warm smile, his eyes shining with pride. You did this, Avery. You stood up to Griffin and defended what's rightfully yours. Ethan would be proud. Those words meant more to me than Jonah could ever know. In that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of closure and vindication washing over me. The storm had passed, and I had emerged victorious, Ethan's legacy intact, and my own integrity unscathed. It was a victory hard won, but one that would forever shape the person I had become. The tension in the room was palpable as Griffin's facade crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. His once charming demeanor had given way to a desperate, unhinged man grasping at straws. You can't do this to me, he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. I deserve a share of Ethan's fortune. Jonah remained steadfast, his composure unwavering in the face of Griffin's outburst. I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself, Griffin. Your attempts at deception have been laid bare, and you have no legal claim to your brother's estate. Griffin's eyes darted around the room, taking in the stern faces of Jonah's associates. Reality was setting in, and he knew he had been backed into a corner. You'll all pay for this, he spat, his words laced with venom. I'll make sure every last one of you regrets the day you crossed me. But his threats rang hollow. a feeble attempt to cling to the illusion of power he had so carefully cultivated. It was then that Jonah made his move, a calculated gambit that would seal Griffin's fate once and for all. "If you have nothing to hide, Griffin, then you won't mind if we bring in a few more witnesses," he said, his voice calm and measured. Before Griffin could protest, Jonah stepped out of the room, returning moments later with a group of unfamiliar faces in tow. I watched, perplexed, as they filed in and took their seats, their expressions somber and resolute. It was then that I recognized some of them. They were former business associates, investors, and even friends of Griffin's, all wearing the same haunted look of betrayal. As the realization dawned on me, Jonah gave me a subtle nod, confirming my suspicions. These were the victims of Griffin's past misdeeds, brought together to bear witness to his ultimate downfall. One by one, they recounted their stories, each more harrowing than the last. Tales of fraud, manipulation, and outright theft, all at the hands of the man who now sat before them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. With each account, Griffin's reputation crumbled further, the once charming facade stripped away to reveal the true depths of his depravity. As the testimonies continued, I could see the weight of his actions bearing down on him. His eyes, once blazing with arrogance, now held a haunted, hollow expression, the look of a man who had finally been forced to confront the consequences of his misdeeds. By the time the last witness had spoken, a deafening silence had settled over the room. Griffin sat motionless, his head bowed, a mere shadow of the man he once was. It was in that moment that I felt a strange sense of pity for him. Despite all the pain and turmoil he had caused, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven him down this path of destruction. Had it been pure greed, or was there something more, a deeper emptiness that he had sought to fill with ill-gotten gains? But my momentary lapse of empathy was quickly overshadowed by the realization that justice had been served. Griffin's deceptions had been laid bare for all to witness, and he would be forced to answer for his crimes. As the room began to clear, Jonah approached me, a look of grim satisfaction etched on his face. "It's over, Avery," he said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Griffin's reign of terror has come to an end." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, truth and integrity had prevailed. "Thank you, Jonah," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Without you, I don't know how I would have made it through this." He offered me a warm smile, his eyes shining with pride. "You did this, Avery. You stood your ground and refused to be intimidated by Griffin's threats. Ethan would be proud." As I looked around the room, taking in the aftermath of the confrontation, I felt a newfound sense of strength and resolve. I had faced the darkness head-on and emerged victorious, my spirit unbroken and my integrity intact. It was a hard-won victory, but one that would forever shape the course of my life, reminding me of the resilience that lies within us all when we stand firm in the face of adversity. The fallout from Griffin's exposure was swift and unrelenting. Within days, the news of his deception had spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of outrage and condemnation that left him reeling. "How could you do this to us, Griffin?" One of his former associates confronted him, his voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "We trusted you, and you took everything from us." Griffin, once so confident and self-assured, could only hang his head in shame, his silence more damning than any words could ever be. Overnight, his reputation lay in tatters, his once charming persona reduced to that of a reviled conman, a pariah in the very circles he had once dominated. But the true reckoning was yet to come. "We need to discuss the legal consequences, Avery," Jonah said grimly, as we convened in his office a few days after the disastrous meeting. I nodded, steeling myself for the inevitable. "What are our options?" Jonah's expression was grave as he laid out the charges that could be brought against Griffin. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and a laundry list of other offenses that could land him behind bars for years. "We have more than enough evidence to press charges," Jonah affirmed. "The question is, do you want to pursue that course of action?" For a moment, I wavered, tempted by the thought of seeing Griffin pay the ultimate price for his misdeeds. But as I searched my heart, I realized that vengeance alone would not bring me the closure I sought. "No, Jonah," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "As much as I want to see justice served, I don't want to stoop to his level. There's been enough pain and suffering already." Jonah regarded me with a mix of surprise and admiration. "Are you sure, Avery? This is a big decision." I took a deep breath, my mind made up. "I'm sure, but I have one condition." A flicker of curiosity passed over Jonah's face. What did you have in mind? I want Griffin to make a public apology, I stated, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. Not just to me, but to everyone he's wronged over the years. And I want him to seek help, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes to make him realize the gravity of his actions. Jonah considered my words for a moment before nodding slowly. I think that's a fair compromise. It won't be easy, but if anyone can convince Griffin to take accountability, it's you. With Jonah's support, we arranged a meeting with Griffin, laying out the terms of our agreement. To my surprise, he agreed without much resistance, his once fiery spirit extinguished by the weight of his own misdeeds. The public apology was a somber affair, held in a small community center that was filled to capacity with Griffin's former victims and associates. One by one, they took the stage, recounting the pain and devastation he had inflicted upon their lives. And then it was Griffin's turn. Hunched over the podium, his eyes downcast, he began to speak, his voice trembling with a vulnerability I had never witnessed before. I stand before you today, a broken man, he began, his words punctuated by the deafening silence of the crowd. For too long, I have allowed greed and ambition to blind me to the consequences of my actions, to the suffering I have inflicted upon those who trusted me. As he continued, pouring out a torrent of remorse and regret, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the man standing before us. Stripped of his bravado and charm, he was laid bare, a human being grappling with the demons that had brought him to this point. I have no excuses, no justifications, he said, his voice breaking. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and vow to spend the rest of my days atoning for the wrongs I have committed. A hush fell over the room as he finished, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. And then, one by one, the members of the crowd began to rise, offering a smattering of applause that slowly swelled into a roar of acceptance and catharsis. In that moment, I realized that true justice had been served, not through vengeance or retribution, but through the power of accountability and redemption. Griffin had been humbled, forced to confront the consequences of his actions, and take the first steps towards a path of healing and growth. As the crowd dispersed, I approached Griffin, our eyes meeting for the first time without the veil of deception between us. Thank you, Avery, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You showed me a mercy I didn't deserve. I offered him a small smile, a glimmer of hope shining through the darkness. We all deserve a chance at redemption, Griffin. It's up to you to make the most of it. With that, we parted ways, our paths diverging towards an uncertain future. But as I looked back on the tumultuous journey that had led us to this point, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and resolution. I had emerged from the storm, battered but unbroken, my integrity and Ethan's legacy intact. And in the process, I had learned a valuable lesson, that true strength lies not in the pursuit of vengeance, but in the courage to offer compassion and the chance for redemption, even to those who may not deserve it. It was a victory that would echo through the years to come, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest of wounds. In the aftermath of Griffin's public apology, a sense of closure washed over me like a soothing balm. The weight of the past few months seemed to lift from my shoulders, and I found myself able to breathe freely for the first time in what felt like an eternity. You did the right thing, Avery, Jonah assured me as we sat in his office, the remnants of the legal battle strewn across his desk. Griffin may have lost his way, but you gave him a chance to find redemption. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only path forward. Ethan wouldn't have wanted me to hold on to bitterness and resentment. Jonah's expression softened, and he reached across the desk to give my hand a gentle squeeze. Ethan would be proud of the strength and integrity you've shown throughout this ordeal. You've honored his legacy in the best way possible. Those words filled me with a warmth that I hadn't felt in far too long. Ethan's memory had been a guiding light throughout the darkness, a reminder of the values he held dear: honesty, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. As the dust settled and the legal proceedings drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. It had been a harrowing path, fraught with betrayal, deception, and the constant threat of losing everything that mattered most. But in the end, I had emerged victorious, not only in protecting Ethan's fortune, but in safeguarding the principles he had instilled in me: resilience, fortitude, and an unwavering belief in the power of forgiveness. It was with these values in mind that I decided to take the next step, a bold move that would cement Ethan's legacy and ensure that his spirit lived on long after I was gone. "I want to establish a charitable foundation in Ethan's name," I announced to Jonah one afternoon, the idea crystallizing in my mind with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Jonah's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That's a brilliant idea, Avery. A fitting tribute to the man who meant so much to this community." And so, with Jonah's guidance and the resources from Ethan's hidden investments, I set about establishing the Ethan Collins Foundation, a beacon of hope and support for those in need within our community. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, organization, and outreach. I poured my heart and soul into the foundation, determined to create a lasting legacy that would embody Ethan's values and his commitment to making a positive impact on the lives of others. As the foundation took shape, I found myself surrounded by a network of dedicated individuals, all united in their desire to honor Ethan's memory and carry his vision forward. "This is what your husband would have wanted, Avery," one of the volunteers shared with me during a community event, her eyes shining with admiration. "He would be so proud to see the good you're doing in his name." Those words resonated deep within me, filling me with a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had been searching for all along. In that moment, I realized that the true victory lay not in the battle against Griffin, but in the resilience and strength I had discovered within myself. As the sun began to set on that warm summer evening, I looked out over the bustling crowd, my heart swelling with pride and gratitude. This was Ethan's legacy, a living, breathing testament to the power of love, compassion, and the indomitable human spirit. And as I stood there, surrounded by the fruits of my labor, I couldn't help but smile. The storm had passed, and a new chapter was unfolding, one filled with hope, redemption, and the promise of a brighter future. It was a journey that had tested me in ways I could have never imagined, but one that had ultimately revealed the depths of my own courage and resilience. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering spirit that had carried me through the darkest of times. For in that moment, I had found my true purpose: to honor Ethan's legacy and to leave a lasting impact on the world around me, one act of kindness and compassion at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a brilliant tapestry of reds and oranges, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a quiet confidence that the best was yet to come.